Good morning. Welcome to another Kenny Cars and Coffee. And today we've got a lot to talk about. Some people wanted to know about some pre-season prep. We're going to do that a little later on. Got some more show and tell with some coilovers and a few quick hitter questions I'm going to try to answer, as well as talk more about the free 5-day workshop we're going to do on transforming your driving experience. That's going to be coming up the 30th, I believe, and it's going to be 5 evenings, about an hour per night. And I'll get into that in a little bit later on. But let's start off with some quick hitter questions. Running without nannies, all the nanny devices turned on. That's a couple things. Depends on what car you're in. Now, if you're in S197, you absolutely, positively have to turn the traction control off every single time you go on track. If you don't, you're going to burn up your rear brake pads. So, traction control can come off. I think you can hold it down, take all the nannies off. But if you want to do that, it just makes sure you have to drive a little bit more precisely. But definitely turn off the traction control. On the S550 cars, again, turn off the traction control. However, on that car, if you turn all the nannies off, be very, very careful. Most of the crashes with S550 cars are with all the nanny devices off, and they crash the back of the car, which is from previous week. It's called oversteer. Oversteer is when the back of the car hits the fence first. So always turn traction control off. Whether you turn all of them off becomes a personal choice. And just be aware that when you do, you really have to step up your driving. Here's a great one. The MT82 transmissions, like in the S197. How do you improve it? Well, I am not a fan of that transmission. So as far as improving it, the only thing you can do is change the shifter. I absolutely hate the shifters in those cars because I'm driving spiritedly. I just have no idea what gear I'm in. We have, I can't remember the name, I think it's like a Barton shifter, maybe something like that. Or you can call in and Rich can help you out with that. But we have a shifter that we put in that really makes a big difference, makes it much easier to shift and much more predictable. So that's about the only way you can improve it. There's another question on cooling, transmissions, rear ends, and engine. Well, engine's real easy. You put a great big radiator in there. In fact, we've got a special 3-core triple pass, triple flow radiator we've developed specifically as a drop-in for S197s and S550 cars. And also, if you're in warmer climates, adding an engine oil cooler is never a bad thing. If you do, the way our kits always come with a thermostat, so that the oil cooler does not engage until you get over like 180 degrees in oil temperature. That way the oil warms up before it hits the oil cooler. As far as transmission, there's, for S197 cars, I think Ford Motorsport, Ford Racing has a little tray that sits underneath the transmission, actually scoops air to it to help cool it. If you need more cooling than that, then you can always add a pump and an auxiliary oil cooler. The rear end, we've never run into an overheating problem at track days with differential, the rear end. On the race cars, absolutely, we had to have a transmission cooler in the back. And again, for the IRS cars, the SN95 IRS cars, if you go on track, absolutely, positively have to have a diff cooler. Also with the 550 cars with IRS, you absolutely have to have a diff cooler. That's because the housing, the differential housing is small and compact, and it's aluminum, and there's no place for the heat to go. So you've got to have a cooler to pull some of that heat off. But with a live axle, you got this great big axle and a lot of mass to absorb heat. Either way, on the live axle, if you're not sure whether you need a diff cooler or not, there is something called temperature stickers. You can just stick this little sticker on there and it'll tell you just how hot the differential gets at some point. Same thing with the transmission. So there's some cooling tips. Okay, now I wanted to get into more show and tell with coilovers. We talked about the JRZ coilovers last week. This week is strange coilovers. And these are for the SN95 cars, and also for Fox with a 96 or newer SN95 spindle. And you can see it's a lot smaller compact shock absorber than for the S197. And the other thing that's different is this top plate, the camber plate. if you remember on the S197 cars and the camber, both camber and caster adjustment, and I said always put as much caster as it'll take. But when we did these for the SN95 cars, we found out that if we eliminate the adjustment for caster and just maximize the caster and the camber plate, I could get actually another a little more than half a degree positive caster. So we just eliminated the caster adjustment, so it just camber adjustment, which makes it kind of nice and easy. And this is the strange double adjustable, just on the bottom like most for a pump, and rebound on the top. And again, it's much more compact than the S197. Now this is the rear shock for the IRS Cobras that we have built. And something that we do that's kind of different is, because we're putting all the load of the spring end shock into the chassis. And normally, this is the bayonet type, OE type shock fitment. Normally, they come with like a little rubber puck for dampening for the shock absorber. Well, we're putting a lot of load in there with the spring, so we don't want to use that. So what we've done, we've actually had made up Delrin. So it's a real solid mount right up to the chassis. And the other thing somebody asked about, why do we have two springs? Well, this is the main spring and this is the helper spring. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Let me get this down, pull the top off. Now, without the helper spring, even if we had this adjusted up, because we're using really high spring rates, the springs don't compress that much, which means as soon as you jack the car up and the shock goes to full extension, you're going to have a gap between the spring and the top. So what we do is we use this little helper spring, and it's got like almost no spring value to it other than holding everything in place. Now, back a long time ago when we were racing open wheel cars, they really didn't have helper springs, and what we'd have to do is every time we jack the car down, have to walk around with a mallet, like a big rubber mallet, and whack the springs, or whack the shocks until you hear the bong, and the spring would fall into place. Fortunately, with helper spring, we don't have to do that. Oh, here's another thing. Adjusting coilovers is super easy. They've got this has a double. It's got a main adjuster and then the locking ring. And when it's loaded, certainly I can easily turn this right now, but when it's loaded, got these little tools to just kind of lock in, and you can twist it. And when it comes to the locker ring, you don't need to have two different tools and squeeze the daylights out of it. All you need is just a little bit of a snug. And the other thing is never ever lubricate the threads on a coilover. You always want to have them clean. The only thing you want to do to them is blast them off with brake clean to keep them clean. Any kind of lubricant on there is going to attract dust, and dust becomes sandpaper. So there we are with our little show and tell. Oh, one more thing. I ran across this. Remember I told you I've got my shock data book for Mustangs, and just looking through it the other day, I stumbled across this and thought this would really be easy to show. A lot of the dyno sheets have a lot of really fine lines. You really can't tell what they're doing, but this should be really easy to tell. Now, we went to Strange to build my shocks. That's kind of the dyno for what I was looking for in a shock, and this is what Strange gave me. Now, if you look at the two, what I wanted and what I got is virtually identical. That's why I say I have these shocks built specifically to my specifications. I mean, I've developed this type of shock valving over a lot of years, a lot of trial and error, and they work out pretty good.
We have a question from Art.
A question from Art.
See if you can find it.
Actually, no, I cannot find it.
Okay, let me read it to you then.
Okay, please read it to me then.
Okay. Should you change springs and shocks between autocross and bigger tracks?
That's a really good question. Should you change springs between autocross and bigger tracks? I can tell you that when we're racing, we have different spring rates for every single track that we run at. And here's why. On really fast, high-speed tracks, you want a lot of spring. On slower, more technical tracks, you want to cut that spring rate down a little softer. So I mean, I haven't done autocrossing for, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but it's a lot. But you're going to want to go down even softer on spring rate because you're going to want the car to take more of a set. If you get too hard of a spring, then the tire's just going to kind of skitter across the top of the pavement, and that's what you want. So the answer is yes. I can't tell you exact spring rates because I have no idea what you're running, but you do want to run a softer spring on autocross than on a track, and you want to run a softer spring. Like in Mid-Ohio, we would run a softer spring than, say, Road Atlanta, which is a fast track. So yeah, spring rates, when you get to that level, you can really do a lot of spring rates as far as tuning the car. And let's find out who else here today. I mean, I'm here. I'm Kenny Brown, and I've got years and years of experience in doing this. And it'd be nice to know what kind of Mustangs we have out there. Also, I want to invite you to join the Speed Therapy Society. That's going to be a closed group within Facebook, and the reason we're doing a closed group because we're going to have a lot more options as far as communication, and that's also where we're going to have the free 5-day workshop on transforming your driving experience, where I'm going to do my best to, well, do what I say, help transform your driving experience. And to give you an idea, here's some of the topics we're going to talk about in the 5 days. We're going to talk about the overall planning and what you want to do. We're going to talk about building the performance foundation, talk about geometry, and also how geometry will help your driving. We're going to talk about front geometry. We've had a lot of questions on geometry, and I figured the easiest way to talk about the geometry that was relevant is talk about the geometry that I've developed for Mustangs over, well, since 1987, and kind of go through the whole philosophy and principle of geometry and how I apply it to the Mustang. We're going to do that for the rear, we're going to do that for the front. We're going to talk about shocks and springs, get a little more depth than that. We're going to talk brakes, boy, that's a huge category of brakes. Wheels, tires, some suspension tuning, the mindset and preparation, and then hopefully by the 5th day we'll get caught up enough that we can commit that to question and answers. If not, we'll do a little catch up and then we'll have a question and answer on that day. It's going to be pretty cool. I really hope that I can help you transform your driving experience. And I'm trying to read, this is not working. We're supposed to have this set up so I can actually read the questions that are coming through, but not working so well.
Week.
Huh?
Next week.
We'll work on it next week. I said we're working kind of through this. Cliff with a FR500S. I had a lot of experience with those cars. I engineered 3 different FR500S cars in the Mustang Challenge in, was it 2009-10? I can't remember, but I've got 3 notebooks of data on the FR500S cars, and there's some good things about them, and there's some things that can really be improved. We've got one customer up in Wisconsin who we took his FR500S and pretty much took the entire suspension off the bottom and put ours on, and just drives like a dream now. We're still working on the technical side. Now, we wanted to talk about some car preparation, getting ready for the spring. Seeing a lot of people are going to be spending more time at home. Yeah, obviously, I'm not even going to talk about that because you get that everywhere else. But this is time to start thinking about your car and getting ready for the. I mean, spring's almost here. Today it's cool. We're getting rain instead of snow, so that's a good sign. And something we're going to put up, and I think, Carrie, it's going to be in the group that we're going to put this up. It's going to be, this is something I've had this for maybe 40 years. This is my little checkoff sheet. It's called my vehicle preparation chart that I always go through the cars before we go to the track. Now, this is a pretty extensive, and there's a lot of things in here that don't apply to Mustangs, which you'll see. But I think the thing to do is for spring, let's keep it really simple. Let's see. There's somebody that drove one of our schools back in the late 90s. Well, welcome. As far as spring, what I recommend is doing a wheels off. Now, wheels off is something we do every track event before, during, and after. But wheels off, I mean, you get the car up in the air and take all 4 wheels off. With the jacking rails, you can get jack stands, 4 jack stands under the car, so everything's free underneath. If you don't have our jacking rails, you need to get some. We've got them for SN95, S5, S197, S195, and Fox. Don't have the S550s yet. That's kind of on my long list of things to develop. But also our Fox jacking rails work for the Gen 1 Mustangs, we found out. But get the car up in the air, pull all the wheels off. Go to Menards or your parts store and get multiple cans of brake clean. And start spraying everything off and getting everything clean. You want things clean so you can see if anything's gone wrong, especially the brakes. You want to clean all that brake dust off and make sure, and anything that looks like is leaking, get it cleaned off so you can see if it's just a residual leak or it's going to leak further. And then do what we call a nut and bolt. And basically a nut and bolt is you put a wrench on every single, wrench or socket on every single nut you can see. And when we're doing motorsports, we have what we call a full nut and bolt and then a light nut and bolt. The full nut and bolt is every nut you can see and touch. The light nut and bolt is, after a while, you kind of know which ones want to kind of loosen up a little bit, so you just go through and do them really quickly. So you got the wheels off, you've cleaned everything off, bleed your brakes. Fresh brake fluid is critically important. In fact, it's so important that we bleed the brakes on my car before the event. We'll bleed them again Saturday night, and we'll bleed them again after the event on Sunday. You always want to have fresh brake fluid, even with brake ducts and good brake pads. It's really important, and you have to have like 600-degree brake fluid, otherwise you're going to boil it. Also check your brake pads. And of course the obvious things like change your oil and filter, check the fluids in transmission and rear end. Your antifreeze, if you've had the car, if it's been in the air for like maybe 3 or 4 years, you might want to just flush out your antifreeze. If it's a dedicated track car, you remember you want to run pure water. You do not want to run antifreeze. Antifreeze is not accepted by any racing sanctioning body, because if you blow a hose or spring a leak, antifreeze is like super slippery. They want that. They want just plain water. Also, water actually cools better than antifreeze or coolant. So if it's a dedicated track car, even if it's not a dedicated track car, we plan on doing a lot of track events, put water in, it's going to cool better. Also add some water wetter. There's a number of different brands out there that you can purchase. That'll help keep transfer the heat from the engine to the radiator to the air. And then don't forget our triple pass, triple thick radiator that is so effective on a Shelby GT350. At Road America, it dropped one customer's temperature on track 30 degrees. That's a lot of degrees. So those are kind of like all the major things. Check your belts, check your wires. You'll see on this, I'm going to put this online via PDF, and you can just kind of go down and see what apply. And then, here's a really important tip. With track cars and race cars, you're always putting the wheels off and on. My recommendation is on each of the wheel studs, put just a little bit of anti-seize. If you don't have anti-seize, just a couple of drops of thick oil. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, you're going to get a better torque value. Secondly, you're not going to tear up threads as you're constantly putting the wheels on and off, and you're torquing them down. What I use is something that right here in my toolbox. It's kind of like it's backwards. What it says is it's copper slip, and it's kind of like, instead of being aluminized anti-seize, it's copper. And that I started using I worked some really good race engineers from the UK back in the 80s, and that's all I ever used, and ever since then that's all I ever used. Is really good stuff. I mean, you can use it everywhere, even on calipers for the studs. If you got a radial brake caliper and you slide it on, put a little bit of the copper slip on that, and it'll never bind up. So that's a real important tip. That way you're not going to tear up lugs, you're not going to tear up your threads, and you're going to get a better torque value. Oh.
I have questions. When you're ready.
Okay, I'll take a question.
First, you have to ask people to invite people.
Before I answer a question, I'm supposed to ask people to invite people. So please invite people. There.
Tell them about the speech therapy.
And the Speech Therapy Society, I mentioned it, Speech Therapy Societies are a closed group. that we're going to have, simply because with a closed group on Facebook, we have a lot more communication options. So please join up for the Speed Therapy. Okay, all right, back up. Join up for the Speed Therapy Society, and that's where we're going to do we are going to transform your driving experience. I'm going to do the best I can to share with you all the knowledge I've gained over the years. Now I can do a question.
Yeah. Okay, this is from Mike Morrison. When you were running the sling cars at Mouseport and the 24 hours at Mouseport, what was the suspension you ran? What rear setup did you have, and what springs? I'm assuming he has a Fox.
Oh, okay. The question is, running the sling cars at Mouseport, what suspension do we run, what setup do we have, and what springs? Well, it's kind of a trick question because there's two different cars, the 86 cars and the 87 cars. The 86 cars were, this is supposed to be, quote, showroom stock racing. Now, our 86 cars were pretty close to showroom stock. We kind of messed around with things. And as far as spring rates, we were stuck with the spring rates that they were running on the Celine cars that year. And I don't recall what they were, but Steve had some springs made up for his street cars, and by rule we mandated to run that. We were running Coney adjustable shocks, and it just wasn't a lot we could do. The thing about the 86 cars is they had no brakes. They had these little teeny 10-inch discs in the front with a single piston, and they had drums in the back, which meant the easiest way to slow one of them down was just kind of park yourself in the back of a Corvette and let him do all the braking. But it was the brakes were kind of like a really dicey deal because I ended up having to, every third pit stop, slide into the back and just the rear brake shoes up, so we actually had a brake pedal. Okay, that was 86. 87, I had the advantage of I wrote the homologation papers. Steve sent me the homologation papers to fill out for the SCCA. So, when it came to springs, on the spring rates, all they asked for as far as springs was the wire size and the free length. Only two specifications. That was it. I got on the phone with the spring company, and with the wire size we came up with a wire size that, within that wire size, I ended up with 3 different sets of springs, 3 different spring rates. And if the tech people check the springs, the wire size is right, the free length is right, but I had 3 different spring rates because it's all based on the number of coils and how they're wound. I think the highest rate we could run back then was somewhere in the maybe 650, 700. Now that's on the control arm, so that would probably translate nowadays on the on a strut to maybe have to do the work out the motion ratio, but maybe 170, 175, which is why on the SA95s and Foxes, what we're running now this is for an intermediate car, and this is remember I told you how to read the spring rates. This is a 550. For sticky tires, I'd run a 650 for performance street, 400 for touring, 350, and then anything in between there just kind of depends on the driver and how the car is being used. But as far as we couldn't do anything to the suspension. But I will say that the K members on the front of the 87 cars were kind of special. Steve, with all his magic, was able to work a deal that one day we got a call to go out to the airport, and one of the little terminals here was a private plane with 3 K members fresh out of the Mustang plant that had no holes in them whatsoever, just steel. Well, a long night by myself, and in the morning when people came in, I had 3 K members sitting on the bench all painted up, looked like they came out of the factory, but I had actually moved every single hole. Which was why our 87 cars kind of steered so well. And that's what I kind of carried into the first generation of my AGS, Advanced Geometry Suspension System, that carried into Fox cars. But what I found after about 2 years doing all this fancy stuff for the street cars, that there was, unless you're really running 100%, 110% all the time, so many adjustments, couldn't make a big difference. So what I did is I just kind of pared down just the adjustments that made the most difference for people, and that was on my AGS 1.0. So that's kind of like suspension we ran at 86 and 87. 86 was terrible, although we did win the 24 hours in 86 with our backup car. Rick had an incident about 4 o'clock in the morning. We were leading the race with the primary car, and that was totaled. So we had to take the second car, which was running, I can't remember, maybe second, third, fourth, somewhere back there, and it was heavily wounded from practice, and we just worked our tails off and moved that up to win the race with that car. And in 87, we just kind of took off from the beginning, just ran the cars as hard as we could, and nobody could catch us. We had one Porsche that was just really, really struggling. We ran 3 cars in 87. We finished first, third, and fourth. And if the race would have gone another maybe 45 minutes, that Porsche that was in second just wouldn't have made it. I mean, it was on its last leg. It barely made the last lap. So that's kind of like the story at Mosport. A track I love. It's a great place. If you've never run up there, absolutely worth going. You have another question?
Well, yeah, they're kind of all related, so, to what you're talking about.
Okay, more questions, all related.
So, James Wickland, he's actually restoring the 89 Popular Mechanics number 25 Mustang that you set up for the showroom stock.
Oh, boy. You're really getting into my brain. James is restoring the 89 Popular Mechanics number 25 car. Woo! That goes back a long way. I would really like to see some pictures of that. If you could send that to us, we get that online. I mean, that's going back. That's going way back. That's really cool. That is really cool. And you have another one?
Yeah, this is from David McDowell, and you did. Do you want me to read it?
Info on diff cooling, running Silver State in the Fox. How concerned about heat in the diff? Differential cooling, how concerned about heat in the diff? If you're concerned about heat in the differential, there's little tags that you can get from most race places that actually you can stick them on the differential and stick them on the axle, and they're going to tell you what your maximum temperature is. If your temperature is running 275 at the bottom, think about getting a cooler in there. You don't really want your temperature to get anywhere close to 300. That's really bad. Also, you start puking fluid. On the diff coolers that we use and we set up, they're actually thermostatically controlled. I like that thermostatically controlled thing because then you don't have to think about it; it just does it all by itself. But the thermostatically controlled, the switch is set for 180 degrees. So the 180 degrees, the differential, the pump, and the fan for the cooler click on, and away they go. The other thing that's cool about having it on thermostatically controlled is even when you pull into the pits and turn the car off, and most people that run a diff cooler that's tied into the manual, turn the car off, turn the diff cooler off. Well, with these, the diff cooler will keep running until your temperature is under 180. So as far as running high speed, I would really, if you're going to run Silver State, that's high speed for a long time, 8.8 differential. I'd seriously consider getting a diff cooler in the back. I mean, it doesn't need to be a huge one. You just need to pull some of the temperature out. Okay, have we got many more questions today?
Why don't you ask for questions right now?
Anybody else have a question?
I have a couple
Even
more.
though I can't read them over here.
Okay, so David McDowell has another bit of information for you. It's a flashback, and he has a connection, a link. It says the blue car is the one of your old magazine cars, I think. The black car is me with you in the passenger seat. People can click on that link and see that if they like. But
Oh yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that too when
Yeah.
I get off.
Okay,
I can't do that right now, obviously, but
so Bob Valente.
oh, Robert.
Yeah, a new suspension. You talked about a year ago about a new suspension for S197.
Coming. You're on the list, one of the first, and our speed therapy group will be the first group to find out about it. And I can't see any more because we're applying for a patent, and the attorney says, so but all I can say is later. And also, I think, Bob, you have some questions. You need to get a hold of Richard Carey and set up one of my 15-minute consults. That's another thing. What we're trying to do is some of these questions are a little more complex than I can answer during this session. So I'm trying to do it like around 3 15-minute complimentary one-on-one consults a week. So if you'd like to sign up for one of those, get a hold of Carrie or Rich,
Go through.
and they'll get you signed up. Oh, also for the Speed Therapy Society, sign up for the Speed Therapy Society, because that's where we're going to do all our cool stuff. In fact, we may be moving this group to that. Just because of, from a technical standpoint, it's going to be much easier to deal with in a group. Groups are much easier to deal with than just, like general Facebook Live. So we're working on that technical stuff that's like over my head. Ask me about cars and geometry and suspension. I'm good. When we get into all this technical Facebook stuff, I can use a little help. So,
Okay, Dino Urso has a question for you.
oh, I can actually see some of it. Can't see all of it. Power steering pumps. Fox SM95, basically. Mustang's running power steering. What is your go-to for factory pumps? I can tell you on the Fox and SN95 cars, all we ever really ran were the factory pumps. But a little trick that we did is, where the little cap screws on, the fill cap, we actually would kind of cut the little filler thing in half, and we put a section of radiator hose in there, so it would elevate the fill cap up maybe 3 inches or so, because a lot of times when they get really hot, they'll start puking fluid at the top. The other thing is it's really important on the older cars to put a power steering cooler in there. I didn't mention that earlier, but a power steering cooler. Ford actually had a nice one. I think it was on the maybe 0304 Cobras, that it just comes out and runs across the front, but in front of the radiator, and it has some fins in it. And that helps keep the power steering cool, which is important. But putting that little, if you're going to be on track or driving it really hard, like we did for the 24-hour races, we put that little extension on the filler so we didn't puke radiator or power steering fluid all over the engine. So that was a good question. Yeah, and absolutely, and the SN95s cool your power steering pump. Also Fox cars, if you're going to be on track quite a bit. Have you got anything else today?
I think that's it.
Wow, I got an awful lot done today. I think I got most of the questions. Track prep, running without nannies, the wonderful MT82 transmissions. Yeah, if you got one of those and you just swear it every time you shift, like I do, get a hold of us. We've got a good shifter option for you. Part of the reason it's such a bad shifter is because half of the shifter mounts the transmission, the other half of the shifter mounts to the chassis. Like in the drive shaft tunnel, which means as you're getting faster, you're going, the engine's torquing, the back of the shifter and the front of the shifter are moving 2 different directions. The shifters we use actually put the entire shifter on the transmission, so it's much easier to shift. So that's my little tip on that. Okay, I think we did pretty good today. We got the closing. My director here. There's my director. Don't forget to join us next week. I haven't figured out what we're going to talk about yet, but this week I didn't know what we're going to talk about, and I got a lot in. So we'll see you next week. Don't forget to invite your friends. Jump into the Speed Therapy Society. Sign up. We're going to have this. This will be a PDF online that you can print off for yourself. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of things you're going to go, oh, that's not on my Mustang. But that's because this was originally set up when I was doing open wheel, like Formula V or Formula Fords, Formula Atlantics, and also Sports 2000s, which were like small prototype cars. So,
I added a link for the Speed Therapy Society.
Carrie has added the link for the Speed Therapy. I don't know if it's this way or that way, but somewhere in there you can add a link. Let's see, Dan. Great to hear from you. Good to hear from you, Dan. And Brad, I got another question on the SCT tuners for you, Brad, so whenever we get a chance, we'll talk. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Have a good week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully spring will be a little closer to springing. Goodbye.